So 2023 just finished and I wanted to give you my thoughts on how you should learn Unreal Engine in 2024. So first I'm going to be talking about people that want to learn Unreal Engine editor in general and become good in Unreal, not in any specific part of Unreal. If you want to learn, let's say, Niagara particles for cinematics or something like that, and that's your only goal with Unreal, then this breakdown might not be for you. But if you just want to become better and more skilled in Unreal, this might have some value to you. So how I'm gonna do this is basically we have 5 categories from beginner to expert, and I'm gonna go over different ways that you can learn stuff and kind of what is good for which skill level. And I'm generally thinking about skill levels in terms of, let's say, months that you know the engine, and let's say that you're working maybe 2 to 4 hours a day. So this is all general, so it can be different for different people, but in general, if you're learning from, let's say, 0 to 3 months, 2 to 4 hours a day, I would generally consider you a beginner. Then you have an amateur, so 3 months to a year, then 1 to 2 years intermediate, then 2 to 4 years advanced, and then more than 4 years an expert. Of course, if, let's say, you get obsessed with Unreal and start learning it for 8 hours a day, you might become an expert in, let's say, 2 years. Or maybe you're taking it slow and you're only learning Unreal for a few hours a week, then maybe you will be an amateur after 1.5 years or 2 years. So that is generally how I'm thinking about these skill levels. So let's begin. First thing, we have tutorials, and I have 2 different types of tutorials. So one is features and then the other is theory. And the difference is features basically teach you how to do something, and theory basically explains stuff to you. So feature tutorials might be stuff like how to make X thing in Unreal or create this Y thing in Unreal. So that will be kind of general idea of features. And theory will be more stuff like how do blueprints work, how do events work, stuff like that. So let's go up here, and this is a few examples of tutorials that are teaching you features or functionality. So we have Unreal Engine 5, create a beach in 1.5 minutes. This is way to make a next thing in Unreal, create your own meta-human, and how to create main menu. So that will be a few examples of feature tutorials. This might not be a typical answer for this, but I think these types of tutorials you should avoid for a little bit when you're starting out. So the reason why I think these are not for beginners is because when you're starting out, you don't really have enough knowledge about the engine to understand how this feature works. So most of the time you're just gonna follow steps that the person making the tutorial tells you. So you might be following the steps that you need to take and stuff like that, and he might tell you a little bit about theory, but it's gonna be mostly go here, click this button, enable this option, stuff like that. And as a beginner, you don't have context of how this works, how it goes with other features, how you can change it. Is it even good implementation or bad implementation? You can even run into risks of getting bad habits where you learn to add a bunch of features, but they're added in a bad way. So now you have some bad habits that long term will probably not work well, and then you're gonna have to change it when you get more skilled and have to kind of unlearn and learn better ways to do stuff. So I actually think that this type of learning is actually best for intermediate and maybe skill levels around it. So this might look like something like this. And the reason for this is because in intermediate level, I think you mostly want to experiment, try new stuff, create a bunch of features, try different game genres, maybe FPS, RTS. You can just play around. I think the intermediate is best way where you have enough knowledge about the engine, but you still do not have a lot of practice. So this is kind of a good way to experiment. I think you will have enough context to know what the person that is making tutorial did and how you can change it and how it works with the rest of the stuff, and if he even implemented it well, or maybe it's not the best tutorial for it, stuff like that. So I would say something like this for feature tutorials. And the second thing that we have is documentation. And documentation, I think, for Unreal gets a bad rap when it comes to like beginner to intermediate. I think it's pretty good, but it gets some justified scrutiny when we talk about advanced or expert level documentation. A lot of advanced stuff is not documented, so when your skill level grows, documentation will start to become less and less useful. So that's why I usually recommend people documentation in the beginning, because you have stuff like quick start. So if we go in here, you have a bunch of stuff that explains to you how you can set up your project, how you can create new class, gives you an example of how you can code in C++, stuff like that. So I think there is a lot of stuff that is good with documentation, it just doesn't translate well when you become more and more skilled. So if you go to, let's say, enhanced input, so maybe you started learning Unreal Engine 4 and you were using the deprecated way of creating inputs. So this might be a good documentation to start you up well with enhanced input. So this might be for, let's say, amateur intermediate, but you also have a bunch of quick start stuff for beginners. So for this, I would say documentation is pretty good for beginners, and maybe we can make it less steep, so maybe something like this, and it falls off. When you go to advanced and expert level, you won't find much stuff. If you have some niche plugins that you want to explore and stuff like that, you probably won't find any documentation, or something really basic where it has like 2 lines or 2 sentences that explain briefly what it does or something like that. So that's something that I would recommend for a beginner, just to start you up well. Next is theory tutorials. So here I'm just gonna do a shameless plug and say that something similar to what I do, you should start watching if you are beginner or amateur. So these are tutorials that explain stuff, so it might be like blueprints essentials, it might be how events work, how functions work, why you should use interfaces, stuff like that. So it kind of explains you stuff about Unreal, but it won't teach you any specific features. You won't learn how to create, I don't know, a grappling hook or something like that. But it will teach you some macro stuff, so how you should structure your project, in which situations should you use components, why you should use interfaces, data assets, stuff like that. So this, I think, is pretty good in the beginning, just because if you learn decently theory in the beginning, it doesn't have to be anything complicated, just generally how stuff works in Unreal. It's going to be way easier to watch tutorials, it's going to be way easier to go into documentation, then it's going to be way easier for you to actually learn stuff. So if you go to videos on my channel, so I do tutorials that explain some features or how you can do X thing, but in general it's going to be a lot of theory. So one thing that I like to do is do pros and cons. So there is a bunch of stuff for inheritance, components, what are pros of the components, maybe they're modular, they are flexible, you can do a bunch of stuff, you can segment your code. But there is also cons, so there is some performance overhead, there may be some debug issues or complexities. So I like this way of explaining stuff because it gives you context. Instead of just listening why something is good, you can also learn why it's bad, so then you can compare stuff. So when should you use inheritance, when should you use components, when should you use maybe interfaces. And I think when you're starting to do basically anything, usually you're kind of like a 5-year-old child where you absorb everything around you. You kind of just there to learn, you're not like critical of the information you get. So you run at risk at learning bad information, learning bad habits, stuff like that. So I think theory helps you generally get the idea of how things work, and then it's gonna be harder for you to learn bad habits because you have context of how stuff works and how stuff should go together and what are pros and cons. So then you can use your own judgment to figure out how you can structure your project. So I would say theory are generally a reverse of features. So I would do something like this here, where I think they're pretty good as a beginner. I think they will also work as an amateur. I would focus less on theory in intermediate level, where I would tell people to just try to experiment, try to do a bunch of stuff, maybe do game jams, just try to experiment with a lot of stuff. And in here you can focus less on theory. Of course, at any point you kind of want to be learning stuff about how stuff works, but it doesn't have to be all the time. So this would be where you would focus maybe least on theory. And when you're a beginner, I think there is like stuff that you should learn, some basic theory about Unreal, so maybe how events work, it's pretty crucial for you to understand that, or inheritance, that's pretty basic one. Since I do tutoring as a freelancer, a lot of times when I'm tutoring people that are just starting with Engine, they usually don't know that they even need to learn stuff like inheritance or how blueprints work or events, stuff like that, and then they get confused. And people, when they start out, they focus on features, so they try to watch a tutorial on how to implement texting, and then they're confused because they don't understand anything. So usually when I'm tutoring, I try to focus on theory a lot, so I see where people are lacking, what knowledge they're lacking, that I think would be crucial for them to understand, so they can more easily watch tutorials that they want and stuff like that. So if you're a beginner amateur and you want to have a tutor or something, I would recommend, instead of using tutor to help you fix some random feature you wanted to add, I would say use them to actually learn how Unreal works and understand different features, because that's going to be way more helpful long term than this random feature that you are watching a tutorial and didn't understand how to implement or something. So yeah, that's theory. Then we have epic courses. So epic courses I think are great for maybe beginner, amateur, and intermediate. And the reason for that is that they are made by people who work on Unreal or are evangelists for Epic, meaning that this is from people that full-time work in Unreal, usually for years, or are expert in a specific feature, and they create a tutorial that you can watch. So you can go to Epic community, you have a learning tab. Usually if you want to watch something, I would sort them by tutorials, courses, and learning paths. And you have different types, so you have Epic Games and you have community. So we're gonna cover community later, but I would suggest going here and trying to watch some stuff. So your first hour in Unreal Engine, that's a good one. There's a lot of theories, so stuff like Blueprint Essentials and other things where it's gonna teach you basically how begin play works, what are different steps that are executed when you click play, how game modes work, what are game states, player states, stuff like that. All of this is gonna be pretty essential when you start creating your games and you want to create something bigger than the simplest version of a mobile game or something. So yeah, I think their courses are pretty great and they're kind of safe compared to community courses. Because for community courses there is no like checks or balances how good the tutor is, so you're not sure if they are good or not. But for epic courses, you know it's created by people that worked on the engine for years or are evangelists, basically people that get paid to work 8 hours a day in Unreal and show people stuff and teach people stuff. So I think this gets pretty good. Of course their courses, I would say, fall off, so there's not like some very advanced or expert level courses. It's generally for this area here. So we're gonna do something like this in here, probably something like that. So a lot of beginner friendly amateur courses and then some for intermediate, but I would say almost non-existent for this area. So then we have community courses. So for that I have two examples, which is full course for beginners and then learn to code in Unreal. So if you open, let's say, this one up,
So testclass.
we can see, so this one is pretty long, it has 1 million views, so it's probably a pretty decent course, 12 hours from Free Code Camp. So there is some pretty good community courses, but for these ones I think you can run a risk of getting a not that good generic course. If you try to just search on YouTube or something, courses, you could probably find some that have hundreds of thousands of views and a bunch of likes, so you're a bit safer there, where you know it's probably a decent course. But since it's a community course, it's more likely that it's not going to be that good of a course. So for that reason, since as I talked before with features, you have less context when you're a beginner for Unreal, what is good and what is not good. You're basically gonna assume, if you don't know anything about the engine, that whatever you're watching is a good way to do something. You're not gonna be that skeptical because you don't have reason to be, you're just learning the engine. So that's why I would say for community courses, I would say for the first few months just try to understand the engine and avoid them. But when you go into the amateur intermediate level, I think you should start watching them. I would also say that 95+% of courses are going to be made for this side, for beginners to intermediates. I think it's going to be hard for you to find some advanced or expert courses. I'm sure there's somewhere, but it's going to be pretty hard. This is kind of the area where you kind of want to start learning. The next thing that we have is hands-on and tinkering. So this is something that I think you should always do. I don't think there is any reason to have like weeks or months of time where you don't touch the engine. So for this, I'm gonna put it something like this. So I think in general, you just want always to be playing in the engine. So maybe you're watching some theory tutorials, that's fine. Maybe for day or two, you're just trying to understand something. But then you should go into the engine, try to do stuff with it. Maybe even while you're watching some tutorial that's explaining how events work, maybe you want to open up Unreal Engine and just try to print something, try to use some functions, try to do stuff, click around, just to get that muscle memory and actually get into practice of actually using the engine. Because if you just know theory and then you go into the engine, you're going to be confused. Stuff is going to be hard because you still need that practice. You can't just do one thing, you always have to kind of work in the engine. Next is tutoring. So this is a really good way for, I think, beginner, amateur level people to accelerate their learning, because they have a person next to them that is way more knowledgeable than them in the engine and can explain them stuff, show them stuff, even tell them what they should be learning, because when you're a beginner you probably don't even know what you should learn. But the issue with tutoring is that usually you have to have money for it, so people are not gonna tutor you for free or mentor you for free. So if you have money, this is a pretty good way for you to learn. But even if you can't afford a tutor, there is some alternative ways, so we're gonna talk later about ChatGPT or the other ways that you can kind of get similar thing where you have someone that you can talk to and bounce ideas off and try to understand stuff and stuff like that. So for tutors, I would say let's do it like this. So something like that. I think it falls off a little bit here, maybe increase in here and then falls. So I'm gonna do something like this. So beginner, amateur, pretty self-explanatory. But for intermediate, since I said the intermediate I think should do a lot of experimentation, I don't think tutor is necessary in here. I think tutor is mostly for understanding. You don't want to hire someone to help you bug fix or something in most of the time. So when you go into intermediate and you're just experimenting, trying new stuff, I don't think tutor is necessary and you should focus on tutor. I think before that is the time for you to learn stuff, and then when you become an intermediate and you have general knowledge of the engine, you want to experiment to get experience. And also, if you're hiring a tutor, you should think about that person as someone that is going to teach you stuff, not solve stuff for you. So if you want somebody to solve stuff for you, that's just a freelancer that you hire for work. So you don't want to hire a tutor for, let's say, an hour and then ask him how to fix a random feature that you tried from a tutorial and didn't manage to make it work. So since I'm freelancing and doing tutoring for some time now, I get stuff like that sometimes, and I try to explain people that in general you would probably want to get greater understanding on the engine and see how I can help them understand. So there is a surprising number of people that are already trying to do their own stuff, have projects that they work months on, stuff like that, and they don't even know what inheritance is in Unreal, so they have no concept of that, or they are creating their own game, they watch a bunch of tutorials for weeks and they don't even know that components exist. So there is like some basic stuff that I think you should take advantage when it comes to tutoring that you should learn. Also, if you're a beginner and you want to hire a tutor, I think it's a great idea to just ask them what they think you should learn, should learn, stuff like that. They're probably gonna ask you to give them more context about what is your goal. So maybe, is your goal to just work on a hobby project from time to time? Is your goal to become a full-time Unreal Engine developer? Is your goal to create some game? What is your goal? So there are gonna be different advice that the tutor is gonna give you depending on what your goal is. But yeah, when you're a beginner, take advantage of that and actually ask them. They're gonna have way better idea of how to learn stuff and what to do than asking them to like fix a thing in your project or stuff like that. That's kind of a waste of a tutor basically. So next we have game jams. For game jams and challenges, I would avoid them for a little bit when you start learning, just because it's not going to be a project that you even knew how you did it, because it's probably going to be like 90% from a tutorial. So I would wait a little bit, get a little bit of knowledge and experience in the engine, and then you can hop onto game jams and start creating fun games. So for this one, I'm gonna do something like this. So I would say avoid it here, you start working here and then falls off probably pretty quickly, maybe leave it a little bit here. So I would say when you become an amateur intermediate, you can start going into game jams and it's gonna be pretty fun, especially in this area where you're trying to experiment. We'll learn to implement new stuff, maybe we'll learn like multiplayer or big open worlds. You can just kind of experiment. I wouldn't say you should start working on your dream game in this stage, depending on what your dream game is. If it's some huge RPG open world, something like that, maybe it's gonna be too challenging, but yeah, it's a good time to kind of hop on game jams and start working on stuff. And I think there is some value to game jams also in the advanced territory. I think when you go in here, you want to work on some more specific or more complex stuff. So usually game jams are more surface level stuff. Usually what you're gonna be doing in game jams is just create a simple character. That character can do a few things and that's kind of about it for like a 48-hour game jam or maybe 1 week game jam. But there is still some value where you can do some niche things. If you find some game jam that has some limitation, maybe your game can be more than, let's say, 5 megabytes or something, so you can find like fun game jams that you can challenge yourself with. But in general, you're gonna probably stop doing game jams when you go to a certain level. Also for game jams, you have something like this on itch.io where you have a bunch of game jams lined up, and then you can pick one that you like and that you want to join. You can also see how long they are. So there is some that are for like 24 hours or 48 hours, but also you have stuff that is, 7 days, 30 days. So you have a bunch of game jams. Next thing, we have Epic Developer Community Forums. So this is just generally online forums. It doesn't have to be this one, but you can find stuff on Reddit, posts that you can learn from. But this way of learning, I think, is mostly suited for when you need to debug something, bug fix something, or want to hear an opinion of bunch of different people about the thing. And this can also be like a Discord group or channel, something like that. So in here you have a bunch of stuff where you can ask questions, try to bug fix or solve some issue. And in general this is fine, but it might fall off in the advanced sections because this is usually for people that are kind of starting out, because most answers and questions are gonna be posted by people in here. Since the more skilled you are, the smaller the group you're in that are similar skill as you. So most people are gonna be beginners, amateurs, and intermediates in Unreal. So that's most of the questions you're gonna see in forums. And that basically means that if you're a beginner and have a question, it's probably somewhere on the internet. You're probably not asking such a unique question that nobody asked it or nobody answered it. So for this one, I would say pretty useful in here, and it kind of starts falling off. Something like that, I would say. For advanced and expert, you might still be in some groups or Discord channels, and you might find some like-minded people and talk there, but in general, your questions are gonna be way more specific and probably not answered. So it's gonna be different ways that you can get that information. That's not online forums or stuff like that. Okay, next one we have engine source code. So this one is probably not for like 95% of people, just because you don't really want to go into source code, start learning. Let's go here. Yeah, start looking through like C++ classes or some stuff like that. But after some time, you're probably the documentation is gonna fall off and you're gonna have questions that you cannot find on the internet. So then you might want to go into Unreal Engine, since they have on GitHub source code for Unreal Engine. You might start going in here, let's say plugins. I know you want to see Bridge plugin, you might go in here and try to kind of find stuff and figure stuff out. But I would suggest you're not doing this. If you are even an intermediate, this is probably something that when you go into advanced stuff and documentation starts drying up, there is no stuff that you can find, you can go into source and try to figure out, try to read code or stuff like that. So I would say it goes probably something like this, but in here you don't even have to bother with this. And yeah, just for context, I'm not sure how useful my advice would be for this group, just because I would say my skill level, depending on what you ask me, is probably from here to here maybe. So depending on what you're talking about. So if there is somebody more experienced, they probably have more knowledge about what and how they can learn. But this is kind of what I would expect from these levels, what they want to engage with. So it will be more theory and going to source code and trying to figure stuff out there. Okay, let's delete this. So the last thing that we have is ChatGPT or other AI, or other, I guess, LLMs. So this could be like Claude or Google Bard or Bing, which is basically kind of ChatGPT, or UserGPT. These guys, I think you should take advantage of in almost all aspects. I'm gonna do a straight line. And the reason for that is that this can kind of be a substitute for like a tutor or a mentor, where you have ChatGPT that can answer you more intelligently than Google. So if you have some specific questions to your project, or you just don't understand something in general, you cannot find it on the internet, just asking ChatGPT can be something similar to how you would ask a mentor or something. Hey, I don't understand this because of this tutorial told me this, but I'm not sure if I should do it that way, stuff like that. That Googling it around, you probably just won't find an answer. So I think ChatGPT, you should also use it throughout your project. ChatGPT can analyze images. So what you can do is, let's say Control-Shift-S if you're or Control-Windows-S if you're on the Windows. You can take a screenshot of, let's say, your blueprint nodes, or maybe you can even copy-paste code if you want, and you can try asking questions about that and see, maybe let's say you're working on some vector transformations or something complicated and you are not sure what's going wrong. You can try to ask it and see if it helps. In general, I would just try to be careful with ChatGPT, because you don't want to use it to just solve your problems or implement a feature. You want to use it to learn. So instead of asking, hey, can you show me step by step how I can add, I don't know, a fireball in my game, and then you just follow what nodes to create or what lines of code to write, and then just do that. What I would say is you better use it for learning. So maybe ask it in general, how would you implement this feature in the game, and then it can tell you, and then you can start working on it. If you get stuck, you can ask ChatGPT, hey, I did this and this and this, but now I'm stuck, I'm not sure what I did wrong, and try to learn that way. Or even try to learn theory, so just ask ChatGPT, hey, what are events in Unreal? I don't understand, I don't know, this begin play event, why is triggered here, and what is it exactly doing, stuff like that. Try to use it for learning, not as a solution or as a problem solver for you. You want to try and problem solve by yourself, or try to implement stuff by yourself, and ChatGPT is just there to explain stuff or give you ideas or stuff like that. So that's kind of a little breakdown here. Now what I'm gonna do is, let's create something like this. So I'm just gonna add lines. So now we're just gonna go column by column and see what's good for what skill level. I'm just gonna break it down like this. And let's do this one. Oh, actually I used green here, so I'm gonna use blue one. For beginners, I would say you want to read documentation. There is a lot of good beginner-friendly documentation. You should take advantage of that. Then you should probably learn theory just because you want to have as much understanding of the engine as possible in the beginning, so you can filter out bad tutorials, bad habits, build better structure for the project, stuff like that. Epic courses are great for beginners, I think, so I think you should take advantage of that. Community courses, I don't think you should learn just for a few months, just for you to get a bit of knowledge in the engine. And also, I think features, so we can X this out. I don't think you should watch tutorials that just show you how to do a thing right away or do a specific thing right away. So for things like hands-on or ChatGPT, I'm not gonna mark it just because I think it's good for any skill level. You always want to tinker with stuff, and I think ChatGPT just can give you advantage in whatever you're doing. Then tutoring, I think this is great for beginners. Game jams, I would just leave it for a little bit and then jump in later. Online forums, I think are good for debugging. You just need to know when to use them. You don't want to just randomly scroll through online forums. You want to use them when you have some issue, or maybe there's some discussion about specific game genre that you want to explore or something like that. Engine source code, yeah, I won't touch it here. And that's about it for beginners. So we have documentation, theory, epic courses, tutoring, and online forums. Tutoring if you have money. If not, you can try to subsidize this one with something like ChatGPT. Then we have feature tutorials for amateurs. I think this is the time you should generally start watching these feature tutorials. Let's not mark it just because we're not gonna put text on it. Just it's kind of a good way to start. Maybe I should have made this less steep, so maybe something like this. It's a good time to start, but you still shouldn't focus too much on it. Just it's kind of safer when you are in this skill level. Documentation, I think it's still pretty good for amateurs. Theory, I think it's fine, but you should start working more on features if you spent enough time in theory in here. Epic courses still pretty good. I would say community courses can start getting good here because they are pretty useful here, and you also have a little bit more context about what courses are good and bad, so you can avoid them. Also, for when learning theory, when watching epic courses that are more about concepts and how things work, I would say pay attention how focused and in the zone you are when you're watching them. When I'm watching something idly, what can happen is that I can zone out because maybe the speaker speaks a little bit too slow for me, or the topic is something that I already know and it's not that engaging. So just keep attention to that. So usually what works for me is I can speed up to, let's say, 1.25 speed. It helps me with attention because now I'm getting information at a speed that my brain finds engaging, so I won't be zoning out. You also need to see if you are burning out and it's hard for you to focus and think about the topic you're learning, because if you are watching a theory, the whole point of watching tutorials that explain stuff is that you are actually thinking about the stuff that you are watching, and if you are maybe too burned out or something similar, you should pay attention to that and stop basically and try to just get some rest, maybe wait a day and then go back again, because you don't want to waste hours watching stuff and then realize you weren't even paying attention and now you just spent hours on nothing. So yeah, it's better to just not watch a video and spend some hours resting or whatever you wanted to do to kind of recharge and then come back, then force yourself, or just try to go through a tutorial or a course and then realize you weren't even paying attention and just wasted hours of your time and you didn't even recharge or something like that. Okay, so hands-on is fine. We have tutoring. I think tutoring is still great here. Game jams, you should be starting doing game jams here. Online forums are still pretty good, and ChatGPT is fine here, and we can do X in here. So for amateurs, probably documentation. We have epic courses, community courses, tutoring if you can afford it. Start working on game jams, maybe some smaller ones for the start, and then go into some crazier ones here. Continue using online forums to fix problems or get people's thoughts on stuff. Okay, now let's go into intermediates. So for this one, I think it's a great time to start implementing features, start testing stuff, create an FPS game, create a turn-based game, create third-person game, start experimenting. You want to get as much hands-on experience and kind of spreading out. Of course, this wouldn't apply for people that want just one specific thing to do in Unreal, but for the learning breakdown I'm doing here, I'm assuming you want to kind of learn Unreal in general and a lot of different features in Unreal. Then documentation, I think it's still pretty good, but it starts to slow down and there is less and less useful stuff that you can find, so we're gonna leave that one. I would say focus more on the working on stuff. The theory is still kind of important, but you want to learn theory a bit less here and focus on doing stuff. epic courses, they start to slow down here. They're still fine, there is still pretty good ones that you can find intermediate level, but they start slowing down. Community courses, I think there is a lot of here that you can learn. A lot of courses are in this range in general, so there's going to be a lot of courses intermediate that is pretty good. Then we have tutoring, so I think since in this level I would say play around a lot in the engine, tutoring starts to get less useful in this way, because as I said before, tutoring I would say is more for understanding and learning stuff instead of doing stuff. So if this is the place or time for you to actually do stuff, then you can kind of slow down on tutoring basically. And this is probably the best time for you to do game jams and challenges, doing stuff in a limited amount of time, having some crazy team, all of that is great. Maybe challenging yourself, I don't know, with friends to make X game in 7 days, or challenging your friends, both of you, to try to make a specific game and see who can do it better or something. Online forums are still pretty good here, but I'm not gonna mark it. And then we have this one here, so you still don't want to probably spend time in the engine. Of course, this wouldn't apply for people that already have low level knowledge, or already have some experience with working on engine, stuff like that. You probably can start with Unreal even if you don't have much experience with specifically Unreal, but you have in work with engines or something. But in general, for most people, you just don't want to touch it. Then we have advanced, so in here feature tutorials are to kind of weigh down. You should probably have enough experience where you can do a lot of things, and if you have a tutorial for feature that you want to implement, you probably will just skim through the tutorial because you just need few pieces of information. The tutorial is gonna show you a lot of stuff that you already know, so you probably won't even watch like 80% of the tutorial for features. Documentation, so this is the time where documentation stops working, let's say, because there is just less and less stuff that it's documented. Yeah, you want to start getting back into theory, so less practice and doing more theory. So courses, I would say there is not many courses for advanced or expert levels, so you probably don't have much. If you find some, I would suggest watching them if there is some advanced course that you find by Epic, but in general there won't be much. And community courses, I would say like 95+% of community courses are gonna be for intermediate level or lower, so it's gonna be starting with Unreal 5, learning blueprints, creating your first C++ projects, so that's gonna be 95% of stuff. Then you have tutoring, so this is maybe where if you can find people. So one thing about tutoring is that you usually have to find somebody that is more skilled in a thing that you want to learn than yourself, for him to tutor you. So the more you go to this side, the less people there are gonna be that are better than you. In this case it would be Unreal Engine 5, but in general. So in this field you still have some people that are better than you, and if you can find a tutor or a mentor that has years in the industry or has a bunch of published games, stuff like that, that is better than you, then you can basically mine him for the knowledge. So there is value here for tutoring. And game jams and challenges, I think in general it's gonna slow down. You're gonna try to work on some more complex stuff or some more specific stuff that's not gonna be game jam friendly, but you can still find some. If you really like working on game jams, don't stop in here. You can continue and just challenge yourself, even if the team is, let's say, I don't know, doors, and game jam is for 48 hours. You can probably make something crazy with portals or warping of the camera view or something. You can do something complex, even though maybe you could just create like a simple interactive game with doors or something. But you can challenge yourself here. Now, online forums, they're gonna be less and less useful, especially since most people that are answering and asking questions would be generally less skilled than you. So if you're an advanced user, there are gonna be some questions that you might have for forums, but most of the questions you probably already went through them and solved, so there's going to be less people answering your question and you're going to have more complicated questions. Online forums might not work here for you much. And then we have engine source code, so this is where you start going to the source code if you need some stuff, and it's kind of hard for you to figure out stuff in engine because you might be digging for some stuff that is not documented. So you can kind of see the inverse happening, so documenting would kind of fall off here and then going to source code would kind of start arising here. So for advanced, I should probably do something like this. I think this is a little bit too steep, so we can increase it a little bit. It should probably be something like this. So you probably should focus on these two things, and also tutoring, maybe you can do this. So you want to focus more on theory, go into lower level stuff related to engine, and maybe if you can afford a tutor, that would be nice here. You can find an expert in a thing and accelerate your learning here. And the last thing that we have is an expert. So here, since these tutorials are usually made by community, it's gonna be a lot of things that are for people in this range, probably even, I would say probably a lot of things that are in this range, and then some things in here, but a lot of tutorials are not gonna be for the expert level, so you won't find much use here if you want to go really in depth into something. Chances that somebody create a tutorial on that in-depth thing is low, because most people create stuff mostly wanted by the community, which is gonna be more lower level stuff. Documentation is probably going to be basically non-existent for what you want, because yeah, not much stuff is documented here. You're going to go a lot into theory, so try to figure stuff out. So you're going to try to find niche tutorials on the topic that you want, and if you find that's great, that's kind of what you're going to be focusing on. You probably won't find any epic courses or community courses that are in this area. Okay, and for tutoring, this is going to be challenging. Ideally, you would find somebody that is better than you, but if you have a lot of experience, it's going to be challenging to find people that can tutor you, since probably 1% of people or less than 1% of people are going to be better than you in this area, in this skill level. So that's going to be challenging. Game jams and challenges, you could maybe go into it, but generally, yeah, you'd have to find some niche game jams with huge challenges or limitations that then you can play around. Online forums, probably not that useful here. And engine source code, this is probably going to be something that you spend a lot of time in, because now you are quote-unquote conquered the editor and stuff that is exposed there. So maybe you want to go at lower levels, some more specific stuff to understand or learn about Unreal Engine. So this is my breakdown. Hopefully this helps you understand how you can learn Unreal Engine in 2024.